Hello, our team is comprised of Nicole Uy and Jasmine Chan, and we will be analyzing the game Mortal Kombat under the 4 modules of the DGDD 150 course, Philosophy, Psychology, Visual, and Audio, for our final requirement. A brief background. Mortal Kombat is a successful fighting franchise that started in 1992 as a 2D fantasy-themed fighting game for arcades. It eventually evolved into 3D rendered graphics with the latest installation, Mortal Kombat 11, which was released on the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and the PC. We will, however, be focusing on Mortal Kombat X, which was released in 2015 and on the mobile version. The gameplay includes both single-player and multiplayer modes, however, we will be discussing the single-player. So the characters in the mobile version are like collector cards that can be leveled up and boosted with other cards like weapons and accessories, and the mobile version's controls only allow for tapping continuously, no complex combinations, and randomly the player has special moves with instructions to swipe a certain direction, and players can switch out characters in their 3-man roster during the fight. Switching allows the character switched out to heal slowly, while the character switched into the battle fights. They also have a bar for special attacks that fills up with each hit the character lands on the opponent. First, the Philosophy module. We would describe the embodied experience of playing the game as that the embodied experience is how the character the player uses becomes an extension of their real self through immersion, especially since it is a fighting game with humanoid characters. So the players feel anxiety when the health is low, or try to tap harder in an unconscious act of trying to make the character they are using attack harder or faster. The players also feel elated when they get nice attack combos or get the finish him cutscene. They also feel annoyed when they miss the correct timing to block. So in contrast from real-life experience in terms of the experience of being in time, in-game, the experience of time becomes the time in-game per round. So some of the levels or rounds in Mortal Kombat have a time limit, so the pressure in-game follows the time in-game rather than real-time. Even though time works the same, so 5 minutes in-game is also 5 minutes outside of the game, but instead of thinking like 5 o'clock to 5:05, we think of it as a countdown. We don't see it as 5:04, we see it as 60 seconds left. Contrasting the gameplay experience with real-life experience, one larger insight is that players gain a sense of second-hand satisfaction from the experience of the character they are using due to their embodiment of the character. This is also why players tend to have favorite characters, or the slang term main is the main character that they love to use. They tend to feel like they embody the character better since they control it better, or they win most often when they use that character. This is why immersed play becomes embodied knowledge, that the player has already learned how to control the character without having to think about it. This can't be seen too clearly with the mobile version since gameplay is just tapping on the screen, but the mobile version still allows for quick context switching between characters since it is a 3-man team and each character has different special attacks. Evaluating the game in terms of the opportunities it provides for ethical reflection, the game is a fighting game and it is violent and gory with some unnecessary cutscenes such as the finish him, which is extremely gory, so there are quite a lot of opportune moments to reflect on the violence the game provides and analyze why them as a player like to play it and whether it is a mode for cathartic release of tension or because the player actually really enjoys violent games and feels pleasure in hurting others. Next is the Psychology module. Some elements that attracted us to play this particular game is that the franchise is well known for its interesting and wide choices of characters and for its incredible combat scenes and violence. We felt like it held the correct details necessary for this project's reflection and analysis, which is why we chose it for this project. A possible negative effect of this video game is desensitization to violence. Desensitization to violence, especially since there is an unnecessary finish him sequence that is extremely gory. It usually features dismembering the opponent or shooting a hole straight through them and seeing and hearing the beating heart, or even cutting the opponent's face straight in half, seeing blood and brains drop. It is unnecessary and does not add to the gameplay at all since the player has already won. All it does is add to the gore factor. There are, however, some possible positive effects are that the improvements and development of fine motor skills such as hand-eye coordination, especially when the player uses a special attack that is a gauge with a diamond moving from end to end, and the player has to time it properly for it to get 100% damage when the player taps the screen. It could also be seen when the player has to anticipate the opponent's attack. Another one could be, it could also aid in memory because the player has to remember the state of the other characters in their team and the characters in the opponent's team. For example, the remaining health or how far along their special attack is charged, and context switching since each character has different skill sets and special attacks. Another possible positive effect is improving their strategic thinking and insights, since players will have to make the most out of the minimal rules and characters in order to win. If we were to improve on this game's psychological aspects, we would remove the finish him portion. We understand that the game developers are trying to keep old players of the franchise interested in the latest releases by keeping some of the favorite features of older games. However, since it is unnecessary to both the gameplay and whatever storyline the game offers, we believe that removing it would enhance the psychological aspects, since it would allow users to experience catharsis of violence onto the game without a quicker desensitization to violence and gore. Next is the art or visual module. The general aesthetics of the game are beautiful. Everything is coherent and cohesive. The thematic look of the game could be described as a dark fantasy, a subgenre of fantasy with darker and more frightening themes. The darker tones used immediately evoke feelings of discomfort and brutality. The liberal use of all caps in the headers and labels with a typeface that is reminiscent of Roman inscriptions, the game is able to elicit images of gladiator battles and coliseums, which is an apt choice for a fighting game. The highly realistic 3D graphics enhance the unsettling display of violence from previous iterations of the game, making it both more satisfying and gruesome to watch. The use of realism also fed into the dark aesthetic that they were going for, unlike, say, a lighter tune, shaded approach that would probably not have elicited the reaction that they wanted, and might have even attracted a set of audience who might not be as attuned to their gore. Even their character design supported the idea of a gruesome fighting game with most of their roster as extremely buff and grungy characters. Unlike games that use a clean, stylized approach to character design such as Fortnite and Overwatch, Mortal Kombat already draws from a roster of existing characters from their previous games, which means that they can only modify limited parts of a character's design. Moreover, Mortal Kombat doesn't need to create protagonists with distinct hero-like appearances, as their audiences are here for the fighting and gore, not to play hero. The color palette gives more of a gray scale, with yellow, blue, and red to stand out. The victory screen is satisfying after gameplay, especially with the red victory and the yellow "You win" text with some of the brightest colors that the player sees in the entire game. One would know if the game has good design or bad design is when the players are able to play the game with as few distractions as possible. Design choices must tie in with the overall aesthetic of the game. Overall, the game is consistent with its graphical elements and design, although there are some more unintuitive elements used. The game aesthetic features that needs to be consistent are the user interface, graphics, shapes, lines, color palette, proportions and animations, and typefaces, in order not to break the immersion, which Mortal Kombat implements well. If we were to redesign something from this game, we would be redesigning its UI or its user interface, because the interactable UI elements are a weak point for this game. They don't look distinct from non-interactable UI elements and can be overlooked by players. From a user experience approach, these can keep the player from performing the right actions. For example, Add to Collection has the same graphical appearance as the other elements on the screen, which makes it less obvious as a button. What sets the button apart are the arrows along its left and right borders, but intuitively a new player can look at it and associate it with an information panel with its use of a similar border and typeface as all the other visible elements. There are two different types of buttons. The designs of these are inconsistent and can be confusing. There are also some areas where the consistent graphical elements became an eyesore, such as the tutorial panels of the game. The borders and typeface look like everything else in the game, except it becomes the most obtrusive part of the screen, giving the players an unpleasant experience of figuring whether to tap it or the area it indicates. The lower X height and small size of the font makes it less readable. In addition to the embellished borders of the panel, the player's eyes gets drawn to the borders instead of the content it surrounds. Last but not the least is the audio module. Some specific elements that take the lead or go hand in hand to make the world more believable are the instrumental background music of battles, which includes string instruments and a synthesized beat with drums that engages the player and agitates and immerses them in the world, especially when it moves well together with the slight eerie sounds of wind blowing or whirring, depending on the stage and location of the battle. The grunts of the characters, the sound of the punches and kicks, and the sound of the swinging of weapons like swords and shooting of guns aids in immersing the player. The sounds of their UI also has a sharp echo to it, like the sound of the cocking of a gun, and the sounds of turning paper, since the game is a type of card collecting game, which keeps the player immersed in the world even when they are not in the middle of a battle. Like the usual fighting game, the objective of Mortal Kombat is to win battles against opponents, and some sound and music cues that help inform players of this are when the player clicks the fight button. The sound effect is that of a sword being unsheathed, which suggests a battle is about to take place. Another is that when the battle starts, there is a deep non-diegetic voice that says "fight," which cues the player and that the battle has begun. There are also levels that do not require the player to do battle but to test their mind by tapping quickly on the screen. In stages like this, the non-diegetic voice says "test your might" instead of "fight," which helps inform the players that this stage is not a battle stage. Finally, in some cases, the non-diegetic voice will say "finish him" after you have defeated the opponent right before the stage gets cleared, which informs the player that the battle is over and to use the final attack combination to end the match. The music conveyed an emotional connection to the player through the background music outside battles. It has an oriental lilt to it, which we believe brings out the battle royale mood, and the drumming beat during the battle gives the players an emotional sense of anticipation and tenseness. It gives the players an artificial sense of adrenaline and evokes an emotional response for a fight. The sound mixing was done well, so there are no parts of the game that is overly saturated with sound. Finally, the main part of the game that is most effective because of the absence of sound would be after the player wins, right before they tap on the screen to move to the next. There is a short absence of sound for the victory, and elation of the player to have time to ring within them, and for the non-diegetic impressive or outstanding or another compliment afterwards to have more weight to it, especially after a hard battle. In conclusion, the game was overall immersive and impressive in terms of visuals and audio, and the gameplay allows the user to get an immersive embodied experience through constant gameplay with their characters. However, there could be some improvements with the overall UI and with the psychological aspects due to the finish him gory cutscene. Hopefully, the next series in the franchise would have improvements on the implementation of these aspects. Thank you!